I'm sure you've heard by now, but on Friday Anthropic just released their newest model, Opus 5. But what does that actually mean? Well, in this video I'm going to go into Opus 5, its pricing, how it compares to the other models including Fable 5, a few demos I've used it to build, and how I'm actually finding it day to day so far. Opus 5 costs $5 million per million input tokens and $25 per million output tokens, and that is exactly the same as what Opus 4.8 costs, and it's half of what Fable 5 costs. But the general consensus is that Opus 5 is essentially Fable 5 level intelligence in most things, if not slightly better in a few things, maybe slightly behind in a few others, at half the price. And I've certainly found that over the past few days using it instead of Fable 5, I've been staying within my usage limits a lot more. Now, what about the benchmarks? Now, okay, you can say what you want about the benchmarks. I think to some degree it is true that benchmarks can be gamed and maybe they're not the most reliable thing. But if we just look through a few, so if we look at firstly, starting with the Arc AGI 3 test, as you can see, Opus is all the way up here, really outperforming other models, including 5.6 Sol and 4.8. And essentially what the Arc AGI 3 test is, as far as I understand it, is it essentially gives the model a problem it's never seen before, a puzzle it's never seen before, and it sees how long it takes for it to solve it. Opus 5 scored 30.2, whereas the next best score is 7.8. So clearly Opus 5 performed very well here. Now, what about actual coding? Well, on Frontier Bench, which is a benchmark that tests how well a model can do a software engineering task end to end, again we see Opus 5 here performing very well, outperforming Fable in fact, and 5.6 Sol, and really outperforming Opus 4.8. That's a score of 43.3 at the top for Opus 5, 33.7 for Fable 5, and only 18.7 for Opus 4.8. Opus also had a go at this year's Maths Olympiad where it scored 42 out of 42. And then in terms of benchmarks around knowledge work and business use cases, well, here, this graph which shows how well it can handle end-to-end business workflows. But if we actually look at the metrics, it had a pass rate of 26% at best. So although Opus 5 is the best model here, it still means that almost 3/4 of the tasks are going unfinished. So I suppose that's impressive improvement, but it does show that there's still room for these models to get a lot better, which I think is the exciting part, because it's really the agent use cases for knowledge work that I focus on. And it's not all absolutely perfect for Opus 5. It does actually have a higher hallucination rate than Opus 4.8, although it still ends up being more accurate overall. According to Anthropic, it hallucinates 6% more, but has 11% higher accuracy. So exactly how that works, I'm not entirely sure, but seems like overall an improvement, but the increased hallucination is an interesting element. And Fable 5 still outranks it on some other coding benchmarks, including SWE-Bench Pro, Deep SWE, and Frontier Code. And some people have commented negatively about how verbose Opus 5 is in its responses. Personally, that hasn't bothered me a whole lot. I have been using Opus 5 a lot for the past 2 days. I think interacting with it doesn't feel too bad, but I do think that at the moment, in many ways, my favourite model with which to interact for most tasks is actually GPT-5.6 Sol. I do really like 5.6 Sol, and I've been using it a lot more. I think it has a good personality. So let's actually get on to the fun part, which is the demos of Opus. And now, maybe these aren't demos of the absolute most impressive thing it can do, but what I did is I essentially gave Opus a goal prompt where its job was to come up with 4 demos and then build them itself. So these are the demos. What we got here, the first one, which I quite like, it's not absolutely perfect, but it's a kind of ray tracing thing. So the idea is these are different glass spheres, and you can see how light would, I guess, refract, and how they reflect off of each other. And yeah, I like it quite a lot. It's not perfect. This is one of the ones I did that was a little bit more than a one shot. I had to go over it a few times, telling it that when it moves, it was a bit grainy, and I think it's still not perfect. Yeah, you can see it orbits automatically. It's a bit grainy. However, I still think it's quite impressive for what was essentially something that it came up with itself. So that's one, and I do quite enjoy that. The next one is a catapult game, physics simulator game, which I quite like. So I think it's built itself like a glass plane here and a brick wall there, and you can shoot these balls, and yeah, they interact with other objects. Slow motion as well. And so having something that actually simulates physics is quite cool, I think. So I quite enjoyed this one. This might be my personal favourite of the demos. Then this one is perhaps not as visually impressive, but in terms of practicality and perhaps business use cases, especially you can imagine if you're a manager of in this case, a coffee shop or something. What we have is some stipulations about how you set up the rota as to who's in. So this is essentially a rota solver, and what you can do is you can say who's in, who's not. Let's say this person's not in, then it will work out which one fits all the criteria. And if nothing's possible, then it will just say that no legal week exists and explain why. So maybe this isn't visually as impressive as some of the physics simulator ones, but I was quite impressed by the idea. First of all, they came up with a scheduling solver, and you can imagine you could set it up so that these rules are changeable. This I was quite impressed as an actual practical use case of Opus 5. Apparently gives itself a fairness rating as well. I'm not entirely sure how it's calculating that. But anyway, I like this. I will be honest, I got it to redo the front end. The initial front end looks something a bit more like this, which is still pretty much as functional, but I thought it looked a little bit like AI slop in a way. And to Opus's credit, with a little bit more work on designing the front end, I think it's come up with something quite good. Right, and then the final demo came up with, and I will be honest, I don't necessarily fully understand this, but essentially what it's doing is it's showing itself learning a picture. So my general understanding is that this picture on the left will have hundreds of thousands of numbers associated with it, stipulating how it looks, and then only 6,000 or so of those are taken over to this picture, and this is the network actually learning the picture by essentially guessing what color different coordinates should be, and then being told how right or wrong it is, and that's why it's getting progressively clearer, is that it's learning as it goes. I might have butchered that explanation, I'm not entirely certain, but I think it's quite an interesting topic for Opus 5 to choose on its own as a good demo, the idea of how neural networks learn. That's quite a meta thing for Opus 5 to present as its demonstration, and yeah, it seems to work relatively well. We can also do some other pictures and learn them progressively. I think it came up with one for itself, Opus 5. And so those are really the 4 demos that I had. Opus 5 build, and I think they're quite impressive. I'm particularly a fan of the physics-based ones, but the duty board, this rota solver, is actually probably the most practically applicable, which certainly makes me excited for the business and knowledge work use cases for Opus 5. And so I guess what are the practical takeaways? Well, I guess what the main thing is, Opus 5 offers you pretty much Fable 5 level intelligence in terms of most things, unless you're doing really advanced cybersecurity stuff which it doesn't cover, or I suppose maybe if you're doing really advanced mathematics or scientific things, then maybe you still want to pay for the intelligence of Fable 5. But I think for a lot of use cases where you were using Fable 5, certainly I'm going to be switching a lot of those over to Opus 5, certainly for the next couple of weeks and probably indefinitely, but I'll see how it goes. And you can just get it, if you're on the API, at essentially half the price. And I think it might actually come out to even cheaper than half the price, because I feel like certainly some metrics I've seen suggest that not only are the tokens cheaper, but it's more, the actual price per task is even cheaper because of its efficiency with using those tokens compared to Fable 5. So I think for a lot of people where you were using Fable 5, in all likelihood it makes a lot of sense to switch over to Opus 5 for many things, because it will not use up your usage rates as quickly. You're not limited if you're on the plan to only 50% of your plan being Opus 5 as you are with Fable 5. And yeah, a few days I've been using it, I think I've certainly enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it feels radically different from using Fable 5. Both are good models. I also don't think it feels, from my use cases at least, like significantly worse or anything than Fable 5. I'd say it feels pretty much as good in terms of the ways I'm using it. I will be honest, and perhaps I'll make a video on this as well, but GPT 5.6 has still been one of my daily drivers in many ways. alongside Opus 5, because I still find I really like GPT 5.6 Sol. I just think it's a faster model. Maybe it's not as intelligent as Opus 5 and Fable 5, but I think it's a really good model. The other thing I think Codex have done really well, especially since they merged Codex into the ChatGPT app, is remote control sessions or remote sessions from your phone on Codex. Like controlling local sessions from my phone on my laptop works really well. I think they've done that better than Claude Code have. So I've been enjoying that a lot, and certainly this week I've been away from my laptop a lot, but still able to get a lot of work done through Codex, through my phone remotely. And yeah, going a little bit off on a tangent there, but I might make a video on how I use Codex remotely when I'm away from my laptop and why I've been enjoying GPT 5.6 Sol. But yeah, I think headlines are Opus 5 is quite an exciting model, because I guess it is showing the general trend that was inevitable once we got Fable 5 level intelligence, which is that level of intelligence is going to keep becoming cheaper and cheaper until I guess it's the new baseline, either because I guess Kimi K3 we saw matched it in some regards, but probably not in the same way. But Opus 5 now essentially matching it at half the price. Yeah, eventually Fable 5 level intelligence will essentially just be the ubiquitous normal AI intelligence at a much cheaper price, and that will certainly be a very exciting time. So I'm going to keep using Opus 5 certainly for the next couple of weeks, see how it plays out, see how I find it. I will in all likelihood have an update on that sometime. So thanks for watching. If you want more Claude Code, more Codex, or more AI tips in general, please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed it, and also to join my community where I go into even more detail on all my AI systems for knowledge work and help you set up your own AI operating system, and yeah, share everything I've learned about Claude Code and Codex and how to use it and how to get actual business utility out of it. Thanks for watching.